So yesterday we posted the first demo of the Gajimaru, and we all talked through different aspects of it, but actually we really skipped over a lot of the big pieces of information that were there, in part because the object was just the demonstration itself. The object now is to unpack some of those things and begin to pull at them and understand them. So I made a very bold statement in the post yesterday that the TLDR is we have created the world's first blockchain and first cryptocurrency. It was a little bit tongue in cheek, but not entirely, because we've been very careful about understanding what it is we're trying to build and why, and where that sits within the firmament of everything that's going on. So at the base core, a blockchain is a common resource layer that we can all believe in, trust in, and operate on. And that leads us to trust markets and the understanding of how these things play out. So Ulf, if you'd like to take it from there and talk through how you see these pieces coming together and the significance of this particular piece.
Yes. So one of the things that really fascinated me when I got into the blockchain space for real in 2017 was the whole concept of trustlessness, because I've been designing distributed systems since the 90s. But practically all of the best practices for distributed systems are based somehow on trust, that you have well-meaning actors that cooperate to achieve consistency. And so that was fun. One thing I noticed, though, quickly with blockchains is that the user experience on a fully trustless system is usually horrible. And so in order to be able to achieve convenience and efficiency in basically all we do, we want to rely on custodians or trust actors, actors who pave the way for us and handle all the difficult bits. And this led me into thinking about how blockchains, they truly need to be trustless at the core, because otherwise, why use a blockchain? This is actually the key aspect that even makes them meaningful, because otherwise they are just extremely inefficient database systems.
I would put this to you to come to the point you're talking about here, that we have an existing resource layer, but that resource layer is not open. And it's run by major financial institutions, major national financial institutions, international financial institutions, and it's very much a closed shop. And the reason that closed shop operates the way it does, and we trust it to do as it's meant to do, is the theory that these things are regulated. There is an overseer, there is an actor from the government, with the electorate support and so on, who is meant to be safeguarding these things and watching what's happening and understanding that certain things mustn't happen, certain risks mustn't be created. But as we've seen, a lot of that is starting to unravel. The 2008 global financial crisis was merely one of these things. I continually point out that actually the only reason why the existing banking system works is because people in the back office of the banks do phenomenal jobs despite the system, not because. And in fact, the only thing that's systemic about financial infrastructure that we use today is risk. But it's deeper than that now, because we're starting to see some real transitions and unpicking of that trust, in that global financial institutions and payment rails have been politicized. You're seeing the politicization of even banking systems within countries. What happened in Canada is the famous example, but very recently we saw the example of Christians being debanked by Bank of America. These are all happening, and once you start to pull at that thread, you're really pulling at something that is completely fundamental to our trust in money, markets, systems. And this is where I think the transformative step with blockchain is to be able to say, look, that isn't working. It hasn't worked in the past. It has led to a platform economy, which is where you've got people rent-seeking, taking the ground, and the rest of us just become useful idiots, to the very short version of that story. So what you're saying here is, look, blockchain actually provides some mechanism for us to replace that infrastructure and, or not replace, but displace maybe in some aspects as well, not always replace. So back to your point about what the purpose of blockchain is and what trust markets are from there.
Yes. So a well-working blockchain would provide you with a perfectly neutral transaction system that doesn't require any trusted intermediaries. And but in order to be able to actually run commercial operations and provide a nice customer experience, we want to be able to provide trust, to streamline things, provide convenience, but also guarantees. So in a normal market, you would, for example, see, say, payment intermediaries that can step in between you and a web shop, for example. We have an example of that in Sweden, one of the leading factoring companies, Klarna, which offers to buy an invoice from a web shop, providing the guarantee for the web shop that they actually get paid before they deliver a product, but also providing the freedom to a customer that they can get the product before they pay. This they do by assuming the risk that there may actually be a conflict, there may be a need to enforce payment from the customer. And the reason why they can do this is that they operate in a regulated space. They actually have the force of law behind them. Now, if they would try to do that on a universal, trustless blockchain that operates outside of any jurisdiction, they actually don't have the force of law behind them because, well, they didn't get paid on Bitcoin. Who cares? What is the crime? Where do you enforce it? So this is where, in order to properly provide for trust markets, provide the conditions for trust markets to grow and operate on your blockchain, you have to think about how to interface with regulation, interface with jurisdiction, interface with the requirements that basically bind your commercial entity already if you're operating in the real world, without sacrificing the core trustlessness that makes it a blockchain in the first place. And this is one of the things that we have been focusing on and that we feel that we have a solution to.
So when we talk about there being a common resource layer, and a trust market, what are the defining characteristics in some of that you would, to conclude this particular video, that you would drive home?
Yes, so our conclusion has been that you essentially you cannot do all of this on one blockchain. That is the one chain to solve all problems and meet all requirements. So this is why we have focused on creating an ecosystem with multiple chains, where we have one true or proper blockchain as the mint, providing the universal currency in the network. But you can have specialized chains, we call them associate chains, where you can choose the consensus method that works for you. You can actually place this in a regulated space. Say you want to run it in Switzerland, you want to talk to the Swiss authorities about what their requirements are. Maybe you want to run KYC on your chain, so that without submitting to KYC, you cannot transact on that particular chain. You can do this, and you can get the force of law behind you and be allowed to do the things in a trustworthy way for your customers, for your market, without infecting the other parts of the ecosystem with your requirements.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing that I find that when you're talking to a lot of blockchain people, we all tend to be fans of the same kind of shows, and there's always this thing that I sense in the market that there's one ring to rule them all. And of course, the irony is that when J.R. Tolkien was writing Lord of the Rings, it was a cautionary tale of the corrupting influence of absolute power. Um, and that's actually the truth of this, that this is really the whole idea of a distributed ledger is to be able to, as I keep saying, trust the message, not the messenger, securely at scale. And when you have such a concentration of power at any point, as I also say to people all the time, if you hear the word trust, you should also hear the word regulate right behind that. Not because I think that we should stop having innovation. That's not the point. The point is that if you're putting somebody in a position of trust, they should have the fiduciary capacity to discharge that trust. Um, and the solution that we're effectively saying is, well, if there's enough people and it's a public open resource, that is the thing that you can trust, is that there aren't a sufficient number of bad actors, and the mechanics of the system weigh against a bad actor being able to do something to the system, which we were discussing this morning is not currently true of Bitcoin. 47% of all new coins minted are by the same group in the same custodian. That is very clearly a threat to the integrity of the network. So you also touched upon the idea that there is legitimacy to permissioned networks, and you're right, because so many of the networks that we use are exactly that. So many of the networks that we'll continue to use. I think one of the core things that we keep saying in our discussions internally, and that we want people to understand externally, is that actually it's not the case that we're saying there will be no banks in the future. There will be none of these things. So many of the things that people from the blockchain world have been keen to say won't exist, they will. They will be the most efficient they have ever been if they utilize this technology. And there are legitimate use cases for these things. So, to your point, yes, you must have that functioning public resource layer, but what infrastructure you enable beyond that has to be fit for the specific purpose. It's not the case that one ring rules them all. But more on that another day. And thank you all for your time. Bye-bye.